Hi, folks. Steven here. Sorry for some technical difficulties on our end getting folks on stage and stuff like that. I was having some weird glitch issues. We'll see what happens there. But first off, I want to start with some very important news. Guess who's trying to get in the Hall of Fame? It's not Shinx specifically, but it's unintentional name sake or whatever. In Excess is nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the fan voting is open right now. It does only count as like one out of very many votes, but you can vote once each day, and encourage you to do so. I've been trying to remind myself to take care of that, but give them the best push that we can this year. All right, so that's important. Other thing is we did have a Pokemon Presents. We will be talking a little bit about what we've got there. Not a ton of new major music news, but I did want to remind folks that hopefully later this week, because next weekend I am quite busy, I will be able to get out the next episode of the podcast, which will have the Stern Roundtable interview from Stern Pinball from last month. You can already get that on the YouTube channel, but that'll be on the website there, or on the podcast feed. And then it should also be the discussion of the music of Pokemon Go for the for mobile. So I'm hoping to get that done in the next few days. Cross your fingers, because next weekend I am going to be at Anime Milwaukee, in Milwaukee, obviously. I will be both covering that event as per usual. We'll have to see what all the press sessions. I did send a list there, and they're working together on some stuff. So on and so forth. But I'm also doing a presentation on restoring media with machine learning. Very carefully chose my verbiage there. That will be on Saturday night. I forget the exact room number. It's on the north whatever thing. But that'll be at 7:15 p.m., I believe. Check your schedule on there. They have it all on Guidebook. But I'll be doing that there. So very busy next weekend. I do plan on recording my panel. I'm not sure exactly how I'll get that out. But Anne, go ahead. Time for you to introduce yourself. Why don't you let the folks at home know who you are and what you've been up to?
Yeah, I'm Anne. I run Pikapi Podcast, a Pokemon anime podcast trying to plug its way through every episode of the Pokemon anime. We're currently in Hoenn. When I'm not doing that, I do a lot of things on the internet. I also write songs, and just the beginning of last month, I put up a music set that is entirely songs I wrote about Pokemon on both the YouTube and my Patreon. So if that is something that you think you might enjoy, you don't have to. I won't take it personally. But head on over to Ann Werner Music at Ann Werner at YouTube. And listen to me sing about Ash and Pokemon and Professor Kukui and whatever else has entered my little head.
Yeah, so quite a bit of stuff. We are both quite busy. Like I said, last month I did have a great opportunity because they're based just outside of O'Hare Airport, actually. Go to Stern Pinball and do that there. I don't know, Anne, I may as well give you a chance. Do you have any reactions to any of that?
To the pinball?
To the physical
the physical Pokemon pinball machine? I mean, you played it, I didn't, but I'm hoping that it was as good an experience for you as you like, because I did see your video.
Yeah, I did like it, but I won't be able to give a full judgment until I get a chance to play it with the collection feature, and it sounds like they want to add a bunch of other stuff. And one interesting thing that came up is that one of the folks there suggested that Pokemon has other plans for pinball, which I think basically means that hopefully they will be adding the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance pinball games to NSO, is what I would expect. I was kind of hoping they do that in tandem with that, but we do know later this month we are getting on NSO expansion pack, we're getting Gale of Darkness, which is mechanically the better of the two games, even though it came second. I think it's much more mechanically interesting than Coliseum, which has some definite rough edges from being their first attempt, even though it does have Coliseum does have a cooler protagonist. So edgier protagonist by Pokemon standards at least. But even though this is the Pokemon anniversary weekend, I guess you could call it, we are doing a discussion today. We're talking about the music of non-Pokemon Monster Tamer games. We each picked out 2 games and 1 song from each of our games. So that's what we're going to be doing today. If you have some other ones, there's obviously far more than 4 Pokemon-ish games from other developers and other teams and stuff like that out there. Many to choose from. So that's and we're only getting to a small handful of them, but yeah, so that's got to be our thing here today. So let's get into that now that we've done our introductions and pleasantries. We're also planning on doing a secondary discussion, like we often do on these, about altitude, or whatever you want to call it in Pokemon games.
Verticality, I think you called it.
Verticality is the one, yes, because we're going above and below ground and underwater on this one, because that's something that looks like it's going to be in Wind and Wave, which doesn't come out till next year, unfortunately. But all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and hit record on here on mine. Nope, it's in pen. Make sure we go into the actual thing there. All right. Anne, are you ready in recording and stuff like that?
I am.
All right, so we're going to give a little pause, and then we're going to go from there. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast, and in our break between Generation 7 and Generation 8, if I remember this correctly, between the Sun and Moon games and the Sword and Shield games, we're doing a couple of side topics. This first one we're doing today is going to be music from other Monster Tamer or Monster Battler games. You may remember during our previous break between X and Y and Sun and Moon, we did other Game Freak games. Now we're kind of flipping the script, and we're going to do stuff from Pokemon's mini imitators? ? This is not meant to be a put down on those games, but obviously Pokemon has been so successful. There are a lot of other games, and they have their own music. So just to give a little background, I've played probably about half a dozen or so other Monster Tamer games, 2 of which I've picked out a song from for this discussion. And what's kind of your experience with Pokemon likes, or whatever you want to call it there?
Yeah, I don't play nearly as much video games as you do, for starters. But I'm sure I've played more monster battler type games than I'm aware of, just because that's not a term I would have used in my mind. Like I've played Pikmin, so like where you're controlling all the little guys. I'm trying to think. Like when I was looking up monster battler games, I didn't see a ton of titles that I've recognized, but I'm sure you can come up with 1 or 2, and I'll be like, I understand that game, or I've played that game before. But yeah, it's not a genre necessarily that takes up a lot of space in my mind.
Well, you've perhaps run into. I don't know. Pikmin is kind of its own thing, because there's usually people look for a wider array of species than Pikmin, which has maybe half a dozen different Pikmin species in there. So maybe not a terrible example, but not that's. I'm not sure exactly what genre that falls into, but there are plenty of games that are much more explicitly in the Pokemon vein, to varying degrees. Some of these definitely take some liberties with it. But Anne, what were the 2 games that you picked?
Yes, I picked Ni no Kuni and Yokai Watch.
Yeah, so that second one is definitely familiar. Ni no Kuni has a very deep familiar system, which is sort of the lead-in to Pokemon in some ways. But it definitely has, of the 2 major Ni no Kuni games, I'm not sure if there are any side games or anything, that is definitely very present in the first one. I picked Monster Sanctuary and Cassette Beasts. Now, in addition to picking 2 games each, we picked 1 song from each of those games. We're going to be going in chronological order of their original release, which that puts Anne's two games first, going by. There is a mod release of Ni no Kuni, which you can get on the Switch, and actually, if you have a Switch too, it does perform a bit better. But the original version of the game, which I think was on the PS3, is the first game to release chronologically, so we will be starting there. So, Anne, tell us a little bit about Ni no Kuni.
Yes, Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. There we go. It's a role-playing game, and it reminded me a lot of Pokemon when I saw the gameplay, but you're kind of following a young boy named Oliver who goes out on a journey to resurrect his recently passed mother. And you kind of you go through the world, like meeting all these people in kind of a fantastical world, like little demons, other humans, like humanoid cat people. You just kind of follow Oliver on this very emotional little journey he's having. And it's very charming. The art style is Studio Ghibli inspired. Music as well is composed by Hisaishi, who has a lot to do with Studio Ghibli. So you're getting a lot of those vibes. The storytelling is maybe not quite as deep as a Ghibli movie might be, but a lot of the cutscenes and like the emotional qualities to everything, like you're definitely feeling a lot of that. But yeah, you explore towns and villages and dungeons, and you encounter little familiars, I guess, little demon monster creatures that you can battle and tame to your side, and you can make friends who have their own familiars and who can also fight battles with you. And you solve a lot of errands, a lot of side quests.
Yeah. Just to give a little extra background on this game, it was published by Level 5, a fairly well-known Japanese developer. I think they're best known in the West is probably the work on the Professor Layton series, which hasn't had an entry for a while, but very big in the 2000s into the early 2010s. But if that name rings a bell, that's probably why. You had mentioned the Joe there, but first off, let's talk about kind of the style of this game. Very orchestral, which is probably not surprising if you know who they hired and probably why they hired him. Yeah,
Yeah.
Joe E.
Do you want me to say it?
I will say it. I will give it the old college try. But Joe Hisa Ishii. It would help if I could bring it just a few things closer. There we go. Joe Hisa Ishii. No, Joe Ishii. One of those is good enough.
If we mix and match a little, we got this.
I wrote the pronunciation in my notes, and it's still not helping me out here. In any case, yes, has worked on many of the Studio Ghibli movies. I've only really seen, Grave of the Fireflies, a fantastic movie that I only do not feel the need to see again. I want to be very clear. It's a great movie. Do not have much of a desire to watch it ever again. And then I've seen Ponyo a couple times. I have that on home video. I assume his work here is pretty similar to what he's done for those films.
Yes, he's got a long and storied history as a composer. By golly, this man has so many accolades. But yeah, you all probably know him most from either work on Studio Ghibli movies or figure skating, where he is like getting a ton of play by thanks to him clearing all of his rights. And then he composed the soundtrack to the 98 Paralympics as well. Like, he's worked with Beat Takeshi on a lot of his movies. So yeah, he's just a very, very prolific guy with a lot of orchestral influences on his music. He's very influenced by John Williams. Let's see, who else has he stated that he's been really fan of Quincy Jones as well, which is kind of where his name came from. He's also like really influenced by electronic music, so like Yellow Magic Orchestra. Um, and yeah, like he started learning the violin at the age of 4, like so that's kind of where his training is like classical Western classical music composition. But like as he grew up, he got into film scoring, and then again more Japanese influenced music, electronic music, a lot of different types of music influences to kind of create his own style of very orchestral yet incredibly Japanese feeling music.
Yeah, definitely the most storied composer or arranger or whatever that we have in today's. Not to put down the other folks there who are much closer to Ann and I's age, but they definitely knew what they were looking for when they signed him up for this one. So, All right, well, let's see. The song that was picked out for here it's one of the city themes. This is "Ding Dong Dell," and I think it's not the first place where the game starts, but it is, I think, fairly early. It's sort of the major city that you end up going to. And what can you tell us about the theme of this location?
Yeah, so this has a lot of very Celtic music mixed with some very classical Western feel. Like it's very courtly. It feels kind of almost like some Baroque period, or like something you would expect of like a medieval castle. Very sweeping. It feels honestly very, very English. But yeah, it has a lot of Western classical music feels mixed with like some Celtic lilts and chords and flute sounds. And it's very grand. It's very like the chords are very deep, and the melodies are very overarching, grand. That makes sense because you're kind of wandering around this village in the shadow of a castle. So like it should be evoking the feeling of like cobblestones and grandeur and like a village just outside this courtly scenario.
Yeah, I put down, let's see. Oh, it's prestigious, but also whimsical. It's got that kind of thing. Obviously, this is a very like the I don't know if it's completely cel-shaded, but the quality of this game is obviously very Ghibli inspired as well. So it kind of fits in there, very somewhat childlike and fantasy aspects like that. One thing I want to mention is that there is a bit of dynamic range in this one, which is not something you necessarily get in video game music, but there are parts of it that are definitely quieter and parts that are louder as it loops through, which I found very interesting. It's very common in film score, where you have a sort of a linear scene where there might be things that happen and stuff, but not as common in video games where everything is either tied to events or locations pretty much. I don't know, I just kind of felt like mentioning that one. Anything you want to add, Anne?
Actually, yeah, noticed that as well. Like I almost chose a different track for this specifically because of that, the In Loving Memory of Allie. But in how to say this, as music has gone along through the decades, compressing it so that it is all the same volume, even your more dynamic versus quieter parts, so that people could say hear it on the radio with ease without having to turn things up and down, has become much more and more common, to the point where when you look at a sound wave file of a popular song, it looks like it's all the same waveform almost. And that is true in video games as well, especially again, just for the nature of what you're trying to do, the type of device you're playing on it, etc. Whereas typically orchestral music, especially stuff that was recorded much earlier, the dynamics are part of the experience. And you'll notice if you like, say, listen to Stravinsky's The Firebird, even the version that they still compressed to put on Spotify, like you can barely hear some of those parts. And then once the loud dynamics come in, they like burst out your eardrums. And so like I did find it interesting, and probably like, again, just a hallmark of somebody who is typically known for composing film, that there was a dynamic range here, not just in the concept of like slower versus ba 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 ba, but like the actual loudness of the file.
Yeah, it gives the city a bit more depth than it might have otherwise, especially since, if you only get to do like one song for a town, as is commonly the case here in video games, having a little bit of that, not a bad thing. But I did want to mention as something we don't get to often. Even in some other like orchestral video games, each track is often very similar volume. But this one takes a little bit of a departure there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's go on to your second game, Anne. This is Yokai Watch, which I'm sure is pretty familiar to a lot of folks out there, as there was a push in the 2010s to bring this to the West. First of all, for folks who maybe need to refresh themselves or did miss it, tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, I still struggle to explain this. I picked it because a lot of the character designs of the yokai, the little demons, look a lot like Bandai's Taiko no Tatsujin characters. But yeah, it's a role-playing game as well that focuses on a lot of Japanese folklore, like the yokai, which are demons, but they are not necessarily evil in the way the Western world uses the word demon. Like they may just be spirits who have passed on, or they may be something else. Like they may just be a different species. If you were a magical species, they may be mischievous, they may not be. But you're following this little boy who is, you kind of are the little boy, and you kind of befriend some other kids who are out there collecting bugs, and then during the course of the game, you find out that the yokai have like stolen their parents, or like taken over their parents and like making them argue and things. And you're like, oh gosh, we gotta keep an eye on all these demons, and kind of figuring out like the yokai responsible for this person who unintentionally said mean things to her friend, this person who's having a fight with this other person. And you kind of just become the yokai watch, like the neighborhood watch. You're running around like basically making sure none of the little demons get into trouble or cause issues for the humans in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Also, I believe a watch accessory is in the game also, so it's kind of double meaning.
That word.
Yeah. As far as the overall style, this is obviously, as you might expect, much more gamey in terms of that. Obviously, kind of focused at a younger audience, but definitely much more traditional video game, I would guess, in its style than Ni no Kuni. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's certainly different in a lot of ways. There are parts of it that I feel like are a little similar, but overall, I think extremely different.
Yeah, as far as who was involved on this, Kenichiro Saigo, hopefully I got that relatively close there, who only other credits I can really find for this person are other level 5 games, which this was also published by, like Megaton Musashi W Wired, is a more recent title, and I assume whatever they're working on next is also in his wheelhouse, most likely. So, wasn't able to find much else. I'm sure he has other stuff. Anne, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, he also does some anime sometimes, like Y Gakuen is one that I've got him on. I think I'm still not sure if Megaton Musashi is anime or no, it's an anime. Okay, so yeah, he occasionally does some anime as well, but yeah, he's not he definitely doesn't have a huge, extensive personal biography on the internet in English the way some say Joe Hisaishi does.
Yeah, no, it's and he's worked on other Yokai Watch games as well, which I think the most recent one was in the late 2010s. They stopped publishing them in the West after like the third one didn't do very well. But But in any case, so the song that Anne picked here is Terror Time Footsteps. I think this is tied to a specific mechanic in the game where the user is sort of in a somewhat like alternate reality version of the city or wherever the game takes place. We'll talk more about game mechanics when we get to our post discussion, which we'll do a brief one on each of these games. But Anne, tell me a little bit about this track.
Yeah, so this is kind of a spooky and mysterious theme. It's got like kind of a harpsichordy type instrument or like a guitar or something stringed that's kind of giving a lot of little just noodling basically and kind of setting a very spooky little vibe. And then it's got like this subwoofer that is working overtime, kind of simulating, say, footsteps. And it's just really good at digging in low and just making a boom, boom sound. So I really love this song this track for its sense of place and purpose. And it's kind of like, it's not like it's discordant all the way through, but there are just something in the noodling every now and then, like it doesn't quite have this, warm resolution of a chord. Like there'll just be little things that feels a little mysterious, a little unsettling in the way that the melody and the noodling progresses.
Yeah, no, it's definitely supposed to keep you on your, pardon the term, toes on this one. If I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but I believe there's a parallel track when you've been like spotted that this switches between here. But
oh yeah.
This bass one is much more sparse and like it's not as dark as like, obviously like a Resident Evil or a Silent Hill type of track would be. But it is very much meant to show that you're in kind of a dangerous situation relative to normal gameplay. And I think it does a pretty good job there. So I think that one worked out. Anything else you wanted to mention about this one?
No, it's just spooky. I love it.
Yeah, very much fitting to both the mechanics, which we'll talk more about later, and also, and all that stuff. All right, well, obviously, like I said, we each picked two games. My first one is called Monster Sanctuary. This came out in 2019. Now, I am going to be trying to be a little more specific. Both of mine, not to, say Anne did something wrong by picking two major studio games, but both of mine are indie games. So I'm going to try and work in some of the information here. But in any case, this came out in 2019. Dennis and Anton Sinner appear to be the driving force behind the game itself. I'm not sure. They must be related in some fashion. It was published by an organization called Team 17. So, but the actual music, at least the track that I picked out, is by a person by the name of Stephen Mellon, who's also worked on Beardblade and Dark Dice. But the overall style, this is it's a platformer, Metroidvania side view game. So this is going to be very different, like in terms of perspective than the rest of ours. But let's see. But the overall musical style is very medieval. You're going through a sort of medieval land. It has like even a clock tower, dungeons, and all that other stuff in there. It's kind of the trappings of a game like that you would expect. But it is fairly medieval, although it does get into some other territories. The song I picked for this is a little bit of an exception. And hopefully you had a chance to at least look this one up. Would you say that's kind of fair, that there's a lot of medieval influence in this one?
Absolutely. Yeah, like from the guy's outfit to the castle on the hill, like the animals that are kind of the, like, I don't know if they're nature spirits or totems or, whatever they play. Like, yes, very, very medieval inspired.
Yeah. Now, the track I actually picked, Horizon Beach, is a little bit of an outlier, certainly. It's much more tropical. Part of the reason I picked this out is both of the ones I picked out on my end are ones I've used on my radio show from 8 to 64 on the low-power FM station here in Madison. But This one is a bit of an outlier because, of course, as you might guess, this song has a calm excitement, which I know is kind of a contradiction in terms of it's very tropical, a little bit calypso, marimba, very warm feeling and stuff like that. And what did you notice about this one?
Yeah, I really liked the all the glittering type instruments, whether it's like the marimba or the xylophone or like all those little high pitched bell sounds. Like I thought it added a very nice touch. There's something very calming about it that like maybe says more European beach to me than necessary. Like maybe not full like the cliffs of Dover, but like something a little closer to a medieval England that we picture type of beach than like the banks of. I thought that was very interesting. Like there's just something like sweeping and windy about it, something that kind of doesn't feel like it's too out of the way for the rest of the game. And I kind of found that very interesting.
Yeah, it does still fit in there, even though, like I said, the setting is a little bit different and so on and so forth. But it's a nice breather, though, as well as from other biomes. Going back to the overall style, I just kind of mentioned there is some tense and energetic music, but even like the normal battle theme is actually not that intense in this game, which is interesting. To kind of want to mention that. But yeah, so that was one of the reasons I use it. Sorry. Starting to think how I want to transition here. But and then one of the other parts I like this when it's about to loop, it has a little, I don't know if it's a horn exactly, but that is a rough approximation of that. And I like that. I think this is one of the best tracks in this, which is definitely one of the standout tracks from this game. All right, well, let's go on to my other one. This is Cassette Beasts, and so this was released at.
Very curious.
Yeah,
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, this game was released in 2023. It's available on Switch, although in our game discussion we'll talk about how that may not be the ideal way to play it. The people behind this one are Tom Coxon, hopefully I said that about right, and Jay Bayless. Now, the actual music, though, the primary person behind that is Joel Bayless, which I have to assume is a relative, brother, cousin, something like that. And the only other game I could find under his name was Lena's Inception, which was the previous game by Bitten Studios. That one is more of a Zelda-ish game, although there is a fair amount of Zelda influence in this one as well. And we'll also be mentioning some of the vocals. Sorry. And this game also has vocal songs, including the one I picked out. Shelby Harvey is the vocalist on a lot of these tracks. But as far as kind of the overall style, the overworld has a bit of a mysterious quality that sort of varies with each biome that you go into in the game. There's about 8 or 10 of those, I would say, out there. The battle music has very much a punk rock, hopefully I'm using that correctly, but a punk rock vibe to each of them. And do you think that's kind of fair for this one?
Yeah, like there might be a little bit of more like little pop influence, a little like, you know, a little alt influence maybe, but like there's a lot of punk going on in this, and it very much makes me feel like my childhood. Like this sounds nostalgic in a beautiful way for me.
Yeah, not yeah. So, but I felt that was a fair comparison. Now, I had mentioned the vocalist, so pretty much all the battle themes in this game, whatever type of battle you're going through, there's about half a dozen, and there's a couple other tracks that are like this as well. Have an instrumental variant and then a vocal variant, where again Shelby Harvey is the vocalist for this game, and I picked Face Down. Now, I know this is used definitely for the captain battles. Captains are more or less the gym leaders of Cassette Beasts, the equivalent there. Although, rather than types, they're mostly based around certain strategies. But face down is used for that. I forget if it's used for the regular. There are a handful of like regular folks that you can battle on there, and I forget if they use it for that one as well. But in any case, this one, it has, regardless of which version, there's a lot of heavy electric guitars, some synth keyboard, very, very much in-your-face type of deal, which covers most of these. Each of the battle tracks has a slightly different vibe depending on who you're going against. But I want to talk about the vocal version. So this game has a mechanic that we'll talk about in more detail in our game discussion, but it's called fusion. Pretty much all the battles in this game are 2-on-2 or more sometimes. And one thing you can do on your side is you can actually fuse with your partner, by which I mean the person who is battling alongside you, into a more powerful monster temporarily, and that's when the vocals kick in. And on this one, they're very confrontational, as you might expect from a song titled Face Down. The lyrics are very much sort of calling out the opponent and stuff like that, which makes sense for a head-to-head battle like this one. What were some of your observations, Anne?
I mean, the idea of like there being a voiceless track and then lyrics coming in when you fuse, like that is such a fascinating mechanic. I kind of love that. There's a lot about this game I'm very curious about. Like, I don't know if I want to play it necessarily, but there's a lot about it that is very intriguing.
Yeah, definitely. You can kind of guess with a name like Cassette Beasts, which does tie into the gameplay mechanics. You can kind of guess they would aim to have a very well produced. I do like a number of the songs here. I'm maybe not as into it as some other folks are, but very, very carefully produced soundtrack for this one. I did want to mention, though, all of these songs have usually some sort of line in them that seems like it would make a good stinger. Maybe not, well, maybe rephrase that. A lot of these songs, their titles or a line in them in the vocal version have something that I think would work very well as a stinger, and I'm a little disappointed that when you finish the battle fused, there's not like a stinger that comes in with the title. In this case, that would be Face Down, with maybe an alternate take or something like that really drives that home. And I feel like that this one also, Same Old Story, which is when you battle some of the higher level enemy monsters in the game, is also a big one in there, and I think that would make a good stinger. But like I said, if you finish the battle well fused, the music just fades out and then fades into the end of battle music, which I think was a bit of a missed opportunity with the dynamics in this game. I don't know. Anne, any thoughts on that suggestion?
Yeah, like this is not one I've played, so it's hard to say. That does sound like a cool idea. Like there are lots of, I feel like this is a game that little attention to detail is kind of what sells it. From like the box art I saw, the little bit of gameplay I've watched, like it does seem like little things about the environment, little things about the character design, little things about the music is what sells it. So yeah, whatever you're suggesting, like with the kind of adding a little stinger, could probably just, be a little thing that elevates it that much more.
Yeah, I do wonder about that one. Like I said, there's obviously some technical things and some music-related things that might make that trickier than it sounds. But it would be interesting to try. And that's one thing I would like to see. Like I said, I did like the music of this game very much so overall. I did buy a copy of it, I think off of Bandcamp is where I got it from. So very pleased with it. Just not, I think like it could have gone up to 11 a little bit more in a few ways there. The other thing with the vocals here is they feel a bit like if you're expecting these songs to have a huge through line, this one does a little more. Same Old Story also has more of it, but some of them are a little bit disjointed. I think that's somewhat intentional with the game's tone and stuff like that, but I don't know. Like I said, not bad by any means, but maybe not exactly what I expected or wanted, but still quite good is how I wanted to shake out on this one.
Makes sense.
All right, well, let's do a little comparison. Obviously, like I said, I think the most similar ones would probably be Ni no Kuni and Monster Sanctuary, just because they have that medieval / whatever Renaissance fair type of feel to them in terms of the instrumentation and stuff like that to a lot of their music. There are some exceptions for both, I'm sure. Yokai Watch is certainly going for a bit more of an anime bend. You mentioned that the composer for that had also worked on various anime projects, so not totally surprising there. And then Cassette Beast, like I said, has that sort of duality where all the battle themes are very guitar-driven pretty much, and then the overworld themes are sort of a take-in-the-sights type of deal, depending on which biome or which part of the overworld you're in. I think they all match the... Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, yeah, Cassette Beasts I think is definitely the most unique of the ones we picked, and probably the most unique of any game we've covered thus far. Like in part, so much as its musical identity.
Yeah, they definitely knew what they were going for, kind of with all of these, but certainly with that one, they had a very specific vision for a game that has. Well, we'll talk more about sort of the background plot. It's the one I've played the most might well be Cassette Beast.
Oh, wow.
But like I said, none of these... Well, let's see, what do I want to say here? But it's kind of good that, like, I do appreciate that none of these really tried that hard to emulate the Pokemon sound. I'm sure other Monster Battler games have done that to a fault. They all have their own musical identity, and I think that's an important thing. One we didn't talk about that I have no experience playing, we didn't talk about Pal World, which is the most recent ish within the last year or two, and probably the most controversial one because of some of the similarities. But, let us know if you have a game that we didn't talk about, that you have a song or two from that you think we should check out, because this is barely scratching the surface of this genre or subgenre or whatever you want to call it. So there's a lot out there. All right. Well, if you do have any comments, you can give us either a comment on one of these videos if you're happening watching them. You can drop us an email, pokepress@gmail.com, or at Pokepress on Blue Sky. Now, for our discussion, we're recording this just after we got our first look at Pokemon Winds and Waves, recording this 2 days after the Pokemon Presents for Pokemon Day. And one thing that appears to be in the trailer there appear to be both above and underwater sections. And so, partially from a musical perspective, partially otherwise, we want to talk about verticality in Pokemon games. Because that's something that's been around for a while. Obviously, in all the Pokemon games, you kind of start at ground level pretty much. I don't know of a game that really starts you really high up or in a cave. Well, there might be something in the Mystery Dungeon that starts you in a cave pretty right off the bat. But you usually start at ground level, which is usually, depending on where you are, if you're in an urban area or a outdoorsy area or something like that, that'll drive the music. But that sort of sets the baseline. Now, the next thing you have is like the underground places. Those tend to be very spacious. Does that sound about right, Anne?
Yeah.
Very open sounding. Very cave. Can be very sparse instrumentation usually and stuff like that. It gives you a little bit of danger. But sort of the ones we want to talk about the most here are kind of, first of all, when you're high up, if you're on a mountain, or if some cases if you're flying. Now, those are two very different identities musically, even though they both take place in the air. I'm reminded of, like, one of the first times you get to go to a mountains. Well, I'm reminded of mountains like, oh gosh, what is it? Like for mountains, if you're actually in the mountains, those can be very isolating sounding or very windy sounding and stuff like that. Does that sound about right, Anne?
Yeah, usually there's like, if not a sparseness, some sort of driving synth sound to kind of pad out the sound of wind.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the mountainous areas in the Sinnoh region, or the Hisui region if you're playing Legends Arceus, where especially as you move up, the sound usually gets a little bit dimmer. Now, contrast that if you're flying, you get sort of a very different type of vibe there because, of course, you have freedom. So, like Soaring Illusions, I think it is. I forget exactly what it is, but in one of the first things where you get to actively fly in the main games is in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. I think I actually stopped playing just before I got to this part, unfortunately. But there's like a daytime and a nighttime thing, and that gives you more of a vibe of freedom, of going where you want and stuff, which is very different than when you're just walking on a mountaintop or a plateau or something like that.
Right.
Any other examples you wanted to call out for that one, Anne?
Well, often, like, when you use Fly, there is, like, a musical ditty, but it's not so much a looped track, so I don't know if those count. But they're usually very different than the music that would play, like, say, while you're flying in Legends Arceus, or gliding, rather. So...
Yeah, I mean, actually, the side games, I think one of the first ones to have an extended flying segment, of course, is Guardian Signs, the third Pokemon Ranger game. That one has extended flying segments, so and probably inspires some of that there. So that's going all the way up. If we go down, obviously caves can be underground. They're always under some type of ground there, but they can be below sea level even if they wanted to. But I kind of want to talk about this Winds and Waves appears to have underwater segments, just judging from the fact that the camera went down there during the trailer, as if to show things happening there. So it sounds like we're going to be doing that. But as far as underwater segments, those go back to at least Gen 3, where you have the dive mechanic in Hoenn. And underwater is oftentimes, well, it depends. If you can freely go up and down, above and below water, games will sometimes use a dynamic thing where usually some of the instruments, like the sound quality changes as you go underwater. Things are kind of muted with some of the instruments there, and sometimes some other instruments will come in. There are good examples of this in some of the Mario games, like in Mario Galaxy and in the one of the water kingdoms in Mario Odyssey. So if you have that, that's usually how that's handled. However, in other cases where the underwater and the above ground stuff is very clearly separated, then you do it a little bit differently, where you go, usually have a completely different theme for the underwater section. And that's how it's done in the second and third Ranger games both have underwater segments. That's how it's done using the Dive HM. And it'll be interesting. I suspect that you'll be able to transition relatively quickly in this new game, which we don't know a ton about. But assuming that mechanic is in there, it'll probably be more of the other one where it adds or removes instruments. And Anne, what are your kind of thoughts on all of this?
Well, musically, it's I think I'm with you. Like, either a muffled sound or adding or removing instruments. But like, it would be fun if there is, like, again, as much musical diversity as there is going from city to city. And like I said, we don't know anything about this game. There very well might be. Honestly, the musical potential is nowhere near as exciting to me as the world building Pokemon potential of, I am so excited. We're going and exploring underwater finally.
Yeah, this is an idea that actually had occurred to me if they ever made like a Pokemon Legends Lugia game that was based around, if they somehow got all the contracts to work out for using the Orange Islands as a setting, where you would go underwater to see more of that area, to give it, pardon the term, more depth. And it looks like we might be getting a mechanic like that in this new game, which would be very interesting if that is the case.
Yeah, because like in our world, we have not finished exploring everything that is in the ocean. Like, I'm just imagining a game where we're there with the people in real time, finding Pokemon that's not even in the decks. Like, we have no frame of reference for what this is. Oh, that is my hope. We'll see. I'm very excited, though.
Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities there. As far as gameplay goes, I mean, obviously your movement is very different underwater, or at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Flying is usually different mechanically than anything else, and underwater can be very different as well. I mean, we've seen underwater mechanics in definitely new Pokemon Snap, which we will talk about at some point. Definitely has some underwater levels. I don't remember. I don't think the first one has any fully underwater levels, so you don't have to worry about that there. But so that the gameplay stuff is also a big thing there. So very interesting. Assuming this mechanic exists, and you are able to freely move above and below water, it'll be interesting to see what they do with that musically. I suspect if you're able to easily go between one and the other, it'll be a case where the instrumentation changes. But yeah, so definitely did want to call that out. So keep an eye on that. Any other thoughts you wanted to put in, Ann?
Well, it's I was just thinking, adapting a gym leader's music theme to have an underwater and an out-of-water component could be very interesting.
Yeah, it depends on the mechanic, if that is in the game, if they decide to do that. We don't know exactly.
It's true, how much are we actually spending underwater? Maybe not as much as Anne imagines.
Yeah, so we'll see how that all works out. All right, like I said, though, you can always give us a comment. Like I said, comment on one of these videos if you happen to be watching live or on replay. You can give us an email, pokepress@gmail.com, or find @pokepress on Blue Sky. All right. Well, we're going to be doing another interim episode in this generational transition. And this will be, it's the most recent entry in this series that Pokemon has a not insubstantial part of. But this will be our discussion of the music of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for the Switch. So this adds, in terms of Pokemon, one or two more characters, a bunch of new tracks from a couple new generations, and as well as a bunch of other stuff. They really, this one has an absolutely massive roster. So we'll definitely be talking about that. And I assume you have played this one at least somewhat.
Yes, I have friends.
Yeah, I don't play competitively, but I do watch a lot of competitive play. It's usually good for an interview at events and stuff like that if I need to do that there. And there's some very skilled people at this, just like all the other Smash Brothers games. But that's what we'll be covering next time. And until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This is Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. All right, so now we're going to do a game discussion on the four of these here. Mm-hmm. One question we really can't answer on this one, though, is it better? Every time one of these major new ones comes out, it's like you'll hear a bunch of people say, "Oh, this is so much better than the modern Pokemon games," and so on and so forth. And that's not a question we can answer for you definitively. Pokemon is obviously more than the sum of its parts as well, which none of these games are nearly as prolific. There. But we'll have some interesting things, I think, to say about each of them.
And you could always play both. It doesn't always have to be an either-or situation.
Does not have to be either-or. And that's true within the Pokemon series often. But, all right,
yes.
So let's leave. It sounds like we don't need a full-on break here, so we can just go into that. Does that sound good with you?
Yep.
Okay, so leave a little pause, and I'll do an introduction of our game segment. All right, well, we talked about the music of these games, but we definitely need to go a little deeper into gameplay for each of them, since they are quite different from each other in some notable ways, and different from Pokemon, I should add. All right, let's go in chronological order, just like we did Ni no Kuni. So this is, I think there's just the two games, maybe some side game is out there, but in any case, this is an RPG that uses turn-based battles, and your main character does battling, as do all these familiars. So it actually goes a step further than I suppose the Legends games do, where your main character can be damaged by attacks. This one, they actually get down and dirty and take part in the actual game's combat. as far as the familiar system, I didn't get a ton of time to look into that, but I know it goes fairly deep. And did you? I know you didn't get a chance to play this, but did you? Were you able to learn a fair bit, or?
Yeah, I spent a little time on Reddit, like trying to get like basically any sort of explanation on these battle tactics. But yeah, like it's kind of you get to choose like either Oliver or any of the other friends you have in your party to control. And when you're not using that one, like there's kind of a computer AI that will control them. Your familiars, like I think it's as it looks like it's very similar to kind of what happens when you're fighting the Team Star in Scarlet and Violet, or maybe mixed with a little bit of well, because it's turn-based, but there does seem to be like a bit of a real-time aspect, because like you can run around with the stylus, so at least a little bit like Legend ZA in that way, like you can run around during the battle. And yeah, your familiars, like in addition to taking damage, they have a stamina gauge, so like if they're in battle for too long, they'll just get recalled and you have to switch to another one or another one of your characters. And they can attack, defend, evade, or psych up. And you can kind of customize their various moves or special abilities. So in some ways, it's very like Pokemon, but it's just a little bit different. They also can evolve, too. They call this metamorphosizing or metamorphose in this game, though.
Yeah, so every Pokemon like, or whatever you want to call it, has a different mix of elements like that, so not too surprising there. All right, well, let's move on to, like I said, one that people might be a little more familiar with, Yokai Watch. Now, I did play a very small amount of this before getting, I don't know if it was stuck or just disinterested or what there. I had to refresh myself on the battle system. The way this one works is that basically all your yokai that do the battling have sort of a default attack they'll use every so often, and then you have to choose when to use like their powered up move and where and how much to land the big hits in the game there. Seems to be the gist of it. And then you have to, it uses the touch screen on the 3DS quite extensively to spin around to actually trigger the attack. Is that about what you saw, Anne?
Yeah, so it's kind of like your party is all organized on kind of a wheel, and using the stylus, you can kind of rotate them like a wheel so that all three are out at any given time. So it, like the order your party is in and who's next to each other when they're thrown out, it, like is very important. I also found there was like usually I think for the soul mate move, like the big special attack or whatever, but like you trace shapes on the stylus, like recharge them or use moves and things, and I thought that was very clever.
Yeah, so there is definitely some different mechanics there. I think it must have some sort of evolution-esque mechanic. Does it? I forget.
I didn't see one off the bat or in any of the Let's Plays. Oh, yeah, they can evolve into another yokai when they reach certain levels.
All right. I do want to... Yeah, this one was definitely hyped also as the next... I do want to get into sort of the reputation of this game, or trajectory, I guess, of the franchise. This was kind of hyped as the next big thing. Not necessarily that it would overtake, but that it would, grab a significant share of the pie of the monster battler thing, which is sort of, if I had $1 for every time I heard that. But I think, like, one thing that Pokemon somewhat inadvertently, I guess, did better is, like, I think yokai, like, not to say it's too Japanese, but I think it's certainly a more Japanese-themed franchise than Pokemon is, despite the original Pokemon regions being based on maps of Japan, having many creatures. I think they pulled from a wider thing, both in terms of the human characters, where you have, like in the first game, you have a character based on Ariel from The Little Mermaid. You have a character based on a well, let's be honest, Lieutenant Surge is clearly a pastiche of Guile from Street Fighter, and Charlie and those types of characters, which are very American in there. And even some of the Japanese stuff like Koga, Ninja is a little more accessible, I think, than yokai generally are. And they also have references to some Western animals, like or even mythical ones, like the New Mexican Thunderbird is what Zapdos is, sort of loosely a phoenix. And I think that helped Pokemon more and maybe made Yokai Watch a little less appealing. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. I definitely think that a lot of Westerners don't get all the references in Yokai Watch, because like even the little bit I watched, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a Tengu, that's a Kappa, that's an Oni, that, like there's a lot of these little things where I'm like, oh gosh, I recognize that. And I can imagine a lot of people who don't have that same life experience probably don't get that same joy and like the little inside jokes and little the little references to a very deep part of their culture that they have grown up knowing. I do also think that Pokemon gets a lot of a head start in just that it was first. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like it's the first one to come up with an idea of like a pet or a monster battling or anything, but it was the first one to get really big, and by default, like it kind of just has already like latched itself into the consciousness. Like, I don't know that Yokai Watch necessarily, it had been released before Pokemon would have necessarily got those heights, but I do think that like because Pokemon was first, nothing else is gonna get it's gonna be a real struggle for anybody else to try to overtake it at this point.
Yeah, we did briefly.
You almost can't, like, what I'm trying to say is like it's a little hard to compare another property and like criticizing it for not being as well received as Pokemon, when like at this point like we are dealing with hypotheticals in a scenario that could never be. Like nothing was going to do it as equal.
Yeah, I don't know if they were shooting for equal, but like I had mentioned, I think at some point in our game discussion or in our music discussion that after the third Yokai Watch, which is apparently, at least in physical form, quite valuable, they stopped releasing them in the West. I don't even know. I'm trying to think. I was looking it up on Wikipedia. I don't remember. Last one might have been just before the pandemic. It may have been a while since I've done anything with it. So, but it's clearly, like I said, I think Pokemon, one reason it was successful is that it did a better job of meeting the outside audience halfway, which also provided obviously a means for them, as they've done other countries' maps in the various other games, starting with Generation 5. I think that's provided a good bridge there to that.
Sure.
And because I know they were hoping with Yokai Watch. Sorry, go ahead.
What's your thought, then?
You're dropping out pretty hard here.
I said you go ahead and finish your thought, and then.
Yeah, I know with Yokai Watch 3 being set in a more Western setting was supposed to harken back more to that, but I think by then it was kind of too late. It did very poorly in the West. I think that this might have been either close to when the Switch came out or even afterwards or stuff like that, so it ended up doing very poorly in the West, and that sort of sealed the deal for it not really coming out here anymore, and Level 5 is content with the remaining games that they've done to just publish it in the East. So
I was wondering, like, do you know what the reception of the movie has been over here? Because I feel like because honestly I was surprised this was a game. That's kind of where I know it from. Like, I feel like I've seen a lot of advertisements for it, and if there's an anime on it, maybe I think so. Like, I was just wondering, like, is that something that was ever on your radar, or do you think the media version of this rather than the game version has maybe gotten a little more traction? Or
Well,
Or
I
are
knew
we
there was
just
an
too old for
anime.
this?
I was not aware of the movie. I probably had heard about it at some point, but I had forgotten it existed until I did some research for this discussion. So, not sure how much of a splash that made. Like I said, I don't.
Okay.
Not sure about that one either. I think it was
Yeah.
a case where it started as
Yeah.
I thought it started as a game, and then by the time it came to the West, there were other avenues within it.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Well, let's move on to my first game. This is Monster Sanctuary. Now, I mentioned that very different to some of the other ones in terms of like gameplay. This is a Metroidvania, and the way that works is, yes, you are going around and you are capturing all these monsters. Well, capturing it, the capture mechanics. Occasionally, you'll find an egg after a battle, is how that one works. But
Ah.
the main gameplay is you're traversing a world from a side perspective. And when you get new monsters every so often, most of them have some sort of ability. And when you get certain key ones, you can use that to progress further in the story. There are also like player versus player battles within the game, so on and so forth. But the sort of the main thing getting around is about finding new abilities and getting to new places on the map and so on and so forth. So Metroidvanias are also a favorite genre of mine. So having those two combined there. As far as the actual battling, those are done via triple battles where you have 3 monsters out of a possible 6 out at any given time. And there's a heavy, like a combo-based system where like the more times you hit one of the opposing monsters, that builds up your combo meter so that the monsters that go later in your order will get a damage bonus and stuff like that. As far as teaching moves, that is done via a skill tree that you get an extra point for every time you level up. And did you get a chance to look at some of the actual like battling mechanics here? And did you have any thoughts on them?
I looked at some of them. I didn't, not as extensively as the ones for the games I picked, but I did kind of like that. Similarly to Yokai Watch, it looked like it was, a 3-on-3 or system, or at least you sent out 3 at one time. So like again, takes us back to the triple battle days of Gen 5. Definitely, triple battles were definitely in Gen 5. So that may have been a loose inspiration there. I did enjoy this game, and actually going back to it just now to refresh my memory, it looks like after I stopped playing it, they added some additional DLC areas or some update areas or whatever that I should explore a little more. So I'll probably be coming back to this. But I did want to mention, I did feel like playing through this, there was some difficulty curve issues in this one. Like especially, usually it was when you enter a new area or when you would go up against another, I forget if they call them, they're not called, I think they're called keepers rather than trainers. But you would go up against another one, and that would be three monsters out at a time for each side, but you'd be using your full 6-member team as part of that battle. And there were definitely times where it was like way harder, and it often was not very obvious to me what had changed, like with the other monsters the other person had, like what were they doing so well and stuff like that. Because it was very, I think it was more opaque than the game developers realized with that one. And one issue one reason I never finished the main game is that when I was playing it, the final boss of the main story is at the level cap. They eventually added an easy mode that shaves off of you there. But imagine if you were either capped at the levels of the Elite Four, which some people do challenge runs for, or if they were all literally at the highest possible level there. That would make it a lot different and probably a lot more difficult and stuff like that. Yeah, there goes my magic carp beam for sure.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to do that with this one, although maybe I'm wrong. But some of the DLC did up the level cap for the post-game stuff, so maybe that's a way for me to actually finish the main game finally. But that was sort of my... But that was sort of mechanically the biggest issue I had, is that there were times where you would go into a team, and since the teams are not usually type-based, they do have elemental affinities, weaknesses, strengths, just like in Pokemon. But there were definitely cases where, it's like, what happened and stuff like that. And it just seemed very strange and confusing to me, where it wasn't like eventually you could kind of figure out what you needed to do, but I don't know. That was sort of the rough spot, the biggest rough spot I had in there. Otherwise, I actually rather enjoyed a lot of it. All right, Cassette Beasts. So this is the most recent one. It came out, like I said, I believe 2023. It was after Scarlet and Violet, actually, about 6 months or 5 or 6 months afterwards. It's available on Switch, just like, let's see, there's a remake of Ni no Kuni, and Monster Sanctuary was also released there. This one is also, some of these are also available like on Steam and stuff like that, as well as some of the other consoles. But in any case, as opposed to a regular Pokemon game, there are a couple differences. First off, the overworld, you can explore more freely, kind of like in the modern games, but it's still, the perspective is still mostly overhead. But the actual progression throughout the area there is more probably closer to Zelda than it is to the Pokemon games. Just in terms of freedom of movement and stuff like that. The battles themselves, like I said, are largely 2-on-2 for the most part. And that is you and another, well, one of your companion characters is actually it looks a lot like one of the new starter Pokemon that was just debuted, revealed for Winds and Waves. It has a very similar name and so on and so forth. But the way it works is that basically your character and your partner will transform into these monsters using a portable cassette player that has recorded this, like the monster on it, and then you'll do your battling that way, which is very interesting.
I love it.
Yeah, that ties into one of the battle themes. It's called Like Chimeras, is actually the title of it, which I guess kind of makes sense in there. Sort of the plot of the game is that you are brought into this island area away from wherever you came from, and there are other people there who are technically from different time periods. You can actually take a look. There's a way you can find out what era they're from. Some of them will say it, but there's also a thing in the game that I don't want to spoil that lets you know what year they're actually from. So like one of the folks there is from like 1985, and thus has no real understanding of what the internet is, and things like that. There's some very interesting characters in there. But one of the big deals is this fusion mechanic, which you can apply once your gauge fills up. And that combines the two active monsters on your side into a thing that has like all the combined stats, the combined moves, combined abilities. The way this works for moves is that there's a gauge that fills up a couple spots each round, and you use up certain number of units with each attack. But when you combine them, you get like a custom monster. I have to assume the way they did this game is like it's technically in 3D, but the characters are all pretty much sprites. I have to assume they structured the bodies of the various characters in a way that enabled them to mix and match them more easily, because there's like over 100 on here. And that's, you square that for the number of fusions. So they must have had some methodology for that. But like we said, in battles, that'll bring in the vocal version of the battle music. And you get... and so that's a big deal, sorry. And overall, it's a big deal in this game. I don't know. What did you think of the fusion mechanic, Anne? I assume you got to see some of it.
Yeah, I'm kind of fascinated by it, especially as you say, like the adding in the vocals when you do. Like it reminds me a little bit of World Ends With You, a little bit. Like the gameplay is completely different, and like really the only thing is the fusion. But something about it really reminded me of that, of like what a big deal it is when that happens in the game, like how you're able to unlock that, and the just how different everything feels, and the special attack you can do together, all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of neat. Like everything about this game kind of fascinates me.
Definitely worth a play. Mechanically, this might be, of the two, the more interesting one, although Monster Sanctuary, hardly a bad game. But I do think I find Cassette Beasts a little more interesting. there are some downsides, though, to fusing. One of those is that you only get one attack per turn, even though it is more powerful, and all your buffs and debuffs on your monsters combined. So if one of them is asleep, well, that's a problem. So there are pluses and minuses to it, although generally you do want to do it if you need to do more damage and stuff. But yeah, now another thing I want to mention, this thing, like I said, it has a lot of sound-based mechanics. One thing it has are called bootlegs, which are monsters that they're highlighted. Their health bar will be highlighted in red in there to show their bootleg. And usually, not always, they can have the same type as usual. This game has about 14 types or so. But they will usually have a different type. And you can record them. Like I said, you use actual tapes to do the recording. There's a couple different grades of tapes and also type-specific tapes and fun stuff. But that's an interesting mechanic for a variety of reasons. The one thing I did want to mention, though, is as one of the downsides, there's a few little things here and there that I think could have been improved. But one of those, on the Switch version, it's had, well, during the first 3 or 4 months, it had some major performance issues where it would crash a fair bit, and frame rate was really bad and uneven and stuff. And then in like May or June of that year, they finally got that ironed out. However, if you have a Switch 2 thinking that you'll get better performance, well, so there's an issue with that as well, where there's like a shader caching issue that causes it to run very choppily for the first couple minutes or whatever when you boot it up on the Switch 2. And I know they were having troubles getting a dev kit. I'm hoping they finally got that done, but they have not pushed out an update for whatever reason, whether that's on their end or something else, for the Switch 2 version to get that to ideally run at like a full 60 frames per second and stuff, which the Switch 2 ought to be able to do. I know people complain about the performance in the main series Pokemon games for some of them, especially Scarlet and Violet and whatnot, but this one does have some issues on Switch when it first came out, and then on Switch 2 now still 9 months in. So did want to kind of caveat that one on there. But overall, still a very, very interesting game, and obviously being musically inclined. It's got a lot of musical stuff. A lot of the bosses are based on classic literature, which is kind of interesting.
That's fun.
And stuff like that. I don't want to spoil too much because there's some interesting things in there. But of the two games, if you are deciding which one to pick out and play, I would say go for Cassette Beast first, unless you're really into Metroidvanias. Monster Sanctuary, hardly a bad game either.
Gotcha.
But I guess we got to ask the question. We can't answer the question: are these better than Pokemon? Because it's not a fair comparison on multiple levels. First of all, Pokemon has a gestalt to it because it has so many different things that none of these games that we talked about today have going for them, really. And then, so it's not a fair comparison. But if you like these more than some of the modern Pokemon games, that's fine. None of these are going to replace them. I do know that, let's see, what is it? Oh, Bitten Studio is working on something new at this point because it says on their website, but they haven't revealed what yet, whether it's a Cassette Beast 2 or something original or whatever.
Okay.
But, yeah, Pokemon is, I don't know if they may put out a PR stance if we're going to, go head-to-head with Pokemon, but even Pal World, the most recent major figure in that area, I don't know. It's a different wavelength there, and we'll see where that one goes. But I'm not expecting anything. It's more like Pokemon has to destroy itself, really, to open up a big enough hole in the market, I suppose. We talked about with Pokemon Go how that game may be a natural monopoly on a real-world augmented reality game based on there, that it may have such a large market share that there's no way for anything else to come in. But I don't know.
At least one where you catch other creatures.
Yeah. Niantic themselves tried with that one. And there have been other monster battlers from Nintendo. Fossil Fighters came out a ways back, and that was one of them as well. But it'll be interesting to see, but definitely interesting to talk about here.
Mm-hmm.
All think that covers it for that there. Well, thank you to everyone who came in. If you're watching this in replay, like I said, you can totally give us a comment of, we may well do a part 2 on this one at some point. I have a feeling that's pretty likely.
Okie dokie.
Just because, well, let's just say there's quite a few of them out there. But
indeed there are, yeah. Lots of new games to discover and explore.
Yeah. So, but thank you. Like I said, next weekend I will be at Anime Milwaukee, so look for me around there. I have a number of interviews potentially to conduct, as well as my own panel. Like I said, Saturday night, how to restore media with machine learning. So that should be interesting. We'll see what comes out for that. But yeah. All right, folks. Thanks.
Bye.